At my wife's office party, her flirty coworker said, "You are nothing but a tropey husband, impotent and broke." Everyone laughed. "We know she loves your bed," they said. 2 minutes later, he regretted it instantly. Look, I'm not saying I have a sixth sense or anything, but I should have known something was catastrophically wrong the moment my wife Tara cornered me in the kitchen with that smile. You know, the one where her eyes get all sparkly and her voice goes up half an octave like she's trying to sell me a timeshare in hell. She was holding her phone in one hand and a glass of overpriced Chardonnay in the other, which honestly should have been my first red flag, because Tara only drinks the fancy stuff when she's about to drop some news that's going to ruin my weekend. "Babe," she said, and I immediately braced myself because nothing good has ever followed that particular tone. The company's having their annual rooftop party this Saturday, and I really want you to come with me. I looked up from the carburetor I was cleaning at our kitchen table. Yeah, I know, real classy. But when you run an auto shop, the work follows you home like a loyal dog covered in motor oil. Define really want, I said, because I've been married long enough to know that words have layers, like an onion. Except this onion was definitely going to make me cry. "It'll be fun," she chirped, and there it was, the first nail in my coffin. "You'll fit right in." I actually laughed out loud at that one, which was apparently the wrong response based on the way her smile tightened at the corners. "Sweetheart," I said, wiping my hands on a rag that was somehow dirtier than my hands. Those two things have never, and I mean never, coexisted in the history of mankind. Fun and fitting in are like oil and water, except in this case, I'm the oil and your coworkers are the water that's definitely going to try to emulsify me. She did that thing where she pretends she didn't hear my very valid point and just steamrolled right over it. "Mason, come on. I've been at Bright Lane Marketing for 3 years now, and you've never come to a single company event. People are starting to think I made you up." "That's because I'm basically a cryptid at this point," I muttered. The mysterious husband who works with his hands and doesn't understand what a growth hack is. Tara worked for Bright Lane Marketing, which was one of those companies that had a foosball table in the break room and called their employees team members, while simultaneously working them 60 hours a week. It was the kind of place where Casual Friday meant swapping your Armani for some designer sneakers that cost more than my monthly insurance payment, and where emotional vulnerability was considered a weakness unless you were crying about how passionate you were about brand synergy. Everyone there spoke in buzzwords and drank kombucha like it was going to save their souls from the corporate void they'd willingly climbed into. Me? I run Ridge Auto Works, a garage that smells like honest work, WD-40, and occasionally burnt coffee because I keep forgetting to clean the pot. My customers are real people with real problems, like my transmission sounds like a dying whale, or I hit a pothole the size of Rhode Island, and now my car pulls to the left. They pay me in actual money, cash, checks, cards, sometimes baked goods if Mrs. Henderson's involved, not in LinkedIn endorsements or exposure. I fix things that are broken, make them work again, and nobody pretends it's going to change the world. It's blue collar, it's honest, and it's about as far from Tara's world as you can get without leaving the same zip code. "Please," she said, and she pulled out the big guns, the puppy dog eyes that she knew I couldn't resist. "Just this once. I promise you'll have a good time. There's going to be an open bar, great food, and you might actually meet some interesting people." I raised an eyebrow. Define interesting. "Mason, Tara." We stared at each other for a solid 10 seconds in the kind of marital standoff that would have made a great Western film, except instead of tumbleweeds, there was just an uncomfortable silence and the faint smell of degreaser. Finally, I sighed, because I'm not a complete monster and I could see that this actually mattered to her, even if I couldn't figure out why. "Fine," I said. "I'll go. But if anyone asks me to explain what I do for a living and then immediately looks disappointed, I'm leaving." She squealed. Actually squealed, and threw her arms around my neck, nearly spilling her wine all over the carburetor. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're going to love it, I promise." "I highly doubt that," I said into her shoulder, but she was already pulling away, her mind clearly racing with whatever mental checklist she had going. Probably something like, Step 1, get Mason to agree. Step 2, Make sure Mason doesn't embarrass me. Step 3. Pray to the corporate gods that this doesn't end in disaster. Spoiler alert, it was definitely going to end in disaster, but I didn't know that yet. Saturday rolled around with all the enthusiasm of a Monday morning, and I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at my closet like it had personally offended me. I owned exactly one suit, a charcoal gray number that I'd bought for my cousin's wedding 6 years ago and had worn maybe 3 times since. I pulled it out and gave it a sniff test, which it technically passed, though there was a faint aroma of motor oil and regret clinging to the fabric like a ghost of poor decisions past. I'd taken it to the dry cleaners exactly once, and apparently, they couldn't fully exorcise the smell of my actual life from the wool blend. I put it on anyway, because what choice did I have? It still fit, which was either a testament to my consistent physique or the fact that the suit had given up and stretched out in defeat. I paired it with a white shirt that I'd ironed myself, badly, based on the wrinkles that appeared the second I put it on, and a tie that Tara had bought me for Christmas that I was pretty sure was supposed to be fun, but just looked like someone had vomited geometric shapes onto silk. Tara emerged from the bathroom looking like $1,000,000, which made sense because she'd probably spent half that on the gold dress she was wearing. It shimmered and caught the light like she was made of actual treasure, and her heels added 3 inches to her height, which meant I'd have to stand up straight all night if I didn't want to look like her shorter, grubbier sidekick. She'd done something complicated with her hair that involved curls and pins and probably some kind of engineering degree, and her makeup was flawless in that way that made her look like she wasn't wearing any makeup at all, which I knew from experience meant she'd spent 45 minutes applying it. "You look beautiful," I said, because she did, and also because I'm not an idiot. She smiled at me and adjusted my tie, her fingers working quickly to fix whatever disaster I'd created. "You look handsome," she said, which was generous considering I looked like a mechanic playing dress-up. "Just try to have fun tonight, okay?" For me, I nodded and told myself I could survive one night of fake smiles, corporate jargon, and pretending I knew what the hell anyone was talking about when they said things like circle back and low-hanging fruit. How bad could it possibly be? The rooftop was the kind of place that made you immediately question every single life choice that had led you to this exact moment, standing under string lights that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, surrounded by people who looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog for corporate success. The musical. Chandeliers, actual chandeliers, dangled from some kind of temporary structure that I'm 90% sure violated at least 3 building codes, casting sparkly light over a sea of people who were all pretending to like each other with an intensity that could power a small city. The champagne was flowing like someone had struck a fancy French river, and everywhere I looked, there were trays of appetizers that I couldn't identify. Little toasts with stuff on them. Tiny spoons with tinier portions. Things wrapped in other things. I grabbed what I thought was a shrimp puff and bit into it, only to discover it was some kind of foam situation that tasted like the ocean had burped into my mouth. I contemplated spitting it into a napkin, but Tara was watching, so I swallowed it down like a man and immediately regretted it. Everyone laughed at everything, and I mean everything, with this weird uniform volume that suggested they'd all attended the same seminar on how to pretend your boss is hilarious. Some guy in a blazer with no tie, because apparently that's what passes for edgy in the corporate world, was telling a story about a client presentation that went wrong, and the punchline was literally just, and then the projector died. But you would have thought he'd announced free money based on the hysterical cackling that erupted around him. I stood there with my hands in my pockets, which I immediately realized was wrong because everyone else was holding drinks and gesturing wildly like they were conducting invisible orchestras, so I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter who looked about as thrilled to be there as I was. At least we had that in common. Tara, meanwhile, was absolutely glowing. And I don't mean that in the metaphorical she's happy way. I mean she was literally reflecting light like a disco ball that had earned an MBA and a 6-figure salary. That gold dress caught every flicker from the chandeliers, every flash from someone's phone camera, every desperate attempt at atmospheric lighting, and threw it back out into the universe like she was some kind of success beacon. She looked stunning, and I felt a genuine surge of pride watching her navigate the room with the kind of confidence that came from knowing you belonged somewhere, which made it even more obvious that I did not belong. She was laughing at something a woman in a power suit was saying, touching the woman's arm in that casual way people do when they're comfortable with each other, and I thought, good for her. She'd worked hard to get here, to build a career in a field that seemed to be equal parts creativity and nonsense, and she deserved to enjoy her success. I was proud of her. Genuinely, honestly proud. Right up until I realized she hadn't introduced me to a single person. Not one. We'd been here for 20 minutes, and I was basically a ghost in a bad suit. Every time I tried to sidle up next to her, to join whatever conversation she was having, someone would swoop in and redirect her attention. It was like watching a very polished game of keep away, except I was the ball and nobody wanted to play with me. She'd glance at me occasionally, flash a quick smile that seemed to say, just a minute, and then turn right back to whoever was monopolizing her time. I was the plus one who came with the appetizers and had about as much presence. The people who did acknowledge me did so with the kind of polite confusion you'd reserve for someone who'd wandered into the wrong wedding. A few guys in expensive suits gave me the up-down assessment. You know the look, where their eyes start at your shoes, scuffed, could have used a polish, travel up your off-the-rack suit, clearly not bespoke, and land on your face with an expression that said who invited you and why. One woman actually asked me if I was with the catering company, and I had to explain that no, I was Tara's husband, which made her say, oh, in a way that suggested she'd heard about me but thought I was some kind of urban legend. I tried to make conversation with a group of guys near the bar who were discussing something about Q3 projections and optimizing the sales funnel, which sounded like they were either planning a business strategy or describing some kind of weird water park ride. I stood there nodding like I understood, throwing in the occasional makes sense and interesting point. But after about 5 minutes, one of them, a guy named Todd or Brad or some other four-letter disappointment, actually said to me, sorry, what department are you in again? I'm not, I said. I'm Mason, Tara's husband. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear someone across the roof laughing at something that definitely wasn't funny. Oh, Brad, Todd said. Cool, cool. So you're like, what in tech? I'm a mechanic. You would have thought I'd announced I was a professional clown who specialized in funerals based on the way their faces froze. That's different. One of them finally managed, and then they all suddenly remembered they needed to be literally anywhere else. So there I was, standing by a chrome railing overlooking the city, sipping champagne that tasted like expensive regret, watching my wife sparkle and shine in her element while I tried to figure out if it was too early to fake a medical emergency. I was contemplating the logistics of a convincing limp when I noticed a pattern. Every time I started to approach Tara, some tall, aggressively groomed man would materialize out of nowhere and intercept her. First there was a guy named Chadwick, because of course there was a Chadwick, who looked like he'd been genetically engineered in a lab to sell luxury watches. He had that effortless hair that probably required 45 minutes and 3 products to achieve, and he kept touching Tara's elbow while talking to her, which made my jaw clench in a way that was probably bad for my dental health. Then there was Preston, who wore a bow tie unironically and kept making Tara laugh by saying things that I could tell weren't actually funny, just performatively witty in that way that people mistake for personality. He kept adjusting his glasses, thick-rimmed things that screamed, I'm quirky and interesting, and I watched as he leaned in close to whisper something that made Tara giggle. But the worst was Blake Crawford. I knew his name because Tara had mentioned him before. Blake from Strategy, she'd call him, always with a little laugh, like his very existence was amusing. He strutted over to where Tara was standing with a group of coworkers, and I watched as he inserted himself into the conversation with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his entire life. Blake was the kind of guy who looked like he'd stepped out of an advertisement for expensive cologne that you'd find in a magazine you didn't subscribe to. Everything about him was polished to an aggressive shine. His shoes, his smile, his hair that had just enough product to look styled but not try hard, even though you knew he'd tried very hard. He had a drink in his hand, and that specific brand of smirk that suggested he thought he was the main character in everyone else's story. I watched as he said something to Tara, his hand casually resting on the small of her back, and she laughed, really laughed, in a way that made something uncomfortable twist in my chest. Not jealousy exactly, but something adjacent to it. A feeling like I was watching my wife exist in a world where I was optional at best and invisible at worst. I downed the rest of my champagne, which was a mistake because it went straight to my head and made the string lights blur slightly, and decided that I needed to either join a conversation or leave entirely. Staying in this weird limbo of present but not participating was making me feel like a piece of furniture. An awkward, out-of-place piece of furniture that didn't match the aesthetic. So I took a deep breath, straightened my tie, and started walking toward Tara and her circle of coworkers, determined to at least try to be social. I had no idea I was walking directly into a disaster that would end with my fist, someone's face, and a viral video that would define the next several months of my life. But hey, at least I tried. I made it about 3 steps toward Tara's group before Blake Crawford spotted me, and I swear to God, his eyes lit up like a predator who'd just noticed the weakest gazelle limp into view. He excused himself from whatever riveting conversation he was having about quarterly metrics or Instagram engagement rates or whatever the hell these people talked about when they weren't busy congratulating themselves for showing up to work, and he made a beeline straight for me with the kind of purpose that made my internal alarm bells start clanging. Up close, Blake was even more aggressively polished than I'd thought. His suit probably cost more than I made in a month, tailored so precisely it looked like it had been painted onto his body by Renaissance artists who specialized in douchebags. His watch caught the light, some fancy Swiss thing with more complications than a soap opera, and his cologne hit me from 6 feet away, a cloud of expensive musk that smelled like what I imagined confidence would smell like if confidence could be bottled and sold at Nordstrom for $200 an ounce. He had this walk, too. Not just a regular walk, but a saunter, like every step was choreographed for an audience that existed only in his head. His shoulders rolled with each stride, his chin tilted up just enough to suggest he was perpetually looking down on everyone. And he had this smile. Jesus, this smile. That was all teeth and zero warmth, like a shark that had learned to fake human expressions by watching too many TED Talks. "Ah," he said as he reached me, and even that single syllable dripped with condescension. "So this is the famous husband." He looked me up and down, his eyes making the same journey that everyone else's had. Shoes, suit, face. Except his assessment felt more like an appraisal, like he was calculating my resale value at a pawn shop and finding me severely lacking. The trophy husband I've heard so much about. A few people nearby, co-workers I hadn't been introduced to, naturally, chuckled at that. Not full laughs, but those knowing little snickers that suggested this was some kind of inside joke I wasn't in on. I felt my jaw tighten, my molars grinding together in a way my dentist would definitely not approve of, but I kept my expression neutral. I dealt with difficult customers before, guys who thought they could intimidate me because I worked with my hands and didn't wear a tie to the office. Blake was just another variation on the same theme. "And you must be Blake," I said, extending my hand because my mother raised me to have manners, even when dealing with people who clearly didn't deserve them. "I've heard a lot about you too." He shook my hand with one of those aggressive grips that guys like him think proves something, squeezing just a little too hard, holding on just a little too long. I didn't flinch, didn't squeeze back like it was some kind of contest, just let him have his little moment of thinking he'd established dominance. When he finally let go, he wiped his hand on his pants like he'd touched something dirty, which was subtle as a freight train and about as classy. "Trophy husband," he repeated, savoring the words like they were some kind of fine wine. "That's what we call him around the office. Tara's little kept man." More chuckles from the peanut gallery. I could see Tara across the way, talking to someone else, but her eyes flicked toward us for just a second before darting away. She'd heard. She'd definitely heard. I smiled, but it was the smile I reserved for customers who insisted they knew more about cars than I did because they'd watched a YouTube video once. "If I'm the trophy," I said, keeping my voice light and friendly, "you must be the participation medal." The laughter shifted, not away from me, exactly, but it got a little more uncertain, a little more awkward. Blake's smile tightened at the corners, just for a fraction of a second, and I felt a small surge of satisfaction. "Point to the mechanic." But Blake wasn't done, not by a long shot. He recovered quickly, his smile snapping back into place like it was held there by rubber bands and sheer willpower. "Touché," he said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "See, Tara told us you had a sense of humor." I was starting to wonder if she'd made that up too, along with, well, he gestured vaguely at me, at all of me, like I was some kind of questionable art installation. "All of this." A woman with severe bangs and a tablet clutched to her chest like a security blanket laughed at that. A sharp, barking sound that reminded me of a startled seal. "Oh my God, Blake, you're terrible," she said, but she was smiling, clearly enjoying the show. "I'm curious," Blake continued, leaning against the railing with the casualness of someone who'd never been uncomfortable a day in his life. "What's it like being married to the most talented strategist at Bright Lane? Must be intimidating, knowing your wife is out here crushing it while you're—" He paused, pretending to search for the right word, even though we both knew he'd had this loaded in the chamber before he even walked over. "What is it you do again?" "Something with cars." "I'm a mechanic," I said flatly. "I own an auto repair shop." Right, right, he said, snapping his fingers like it had just come back to him, even though I knew damn well Tara had told him exactly what I did. "Auto repair. That's quaint. Very blue-collar. Very hands-on." The way he said hands-on made it sound like I was doing something vaguely pornographic. "Tell me, man, how's business? I heard the auto repair industry is really struggling these days. All these new electric cars, computer diagnostics, dealerships with their service departments. Must be tough out there for the independent guys." There it was, the knife, sliding in smooth between the ribs, wrapped in concern and fake curiosity. Around us, people had started to pay attention, conversations dying down as they sensed drama brewing like a storm on the horizon. I could feel eyes on us, could sense phones being subtly angled in our direction because God forbid anyone miss a potential viral moment. "Business is fine," I said, my voice leveled despite the fact that my fist was itching to introduce itself to his perfectly symmetrical face. "Steady customers, honest work, no complaints. People still need their cars fixed, turns out. Wild concept, I know. But not thriving," Blake pressed, because apparently he'd majored in being an asshole with a minor in not knowing when to shut up. "I mean, let's be real here. How much does a mechanic make these days? 50, 60K? Meanwhile, Tara's pulling down 6 figures easy, probably more with her bonuses. That's got to create some tension at home, some imbalance." Someone whistled low, and another person muttered "damn" under their breath. The circle around us had grown, I realized. We'd become the entertainment, the floor show, the thing people would talk about on Monday morning around the coffee machine. "You seem really interested in my financial situation," I observed. "That's weird, right? That's a weird thing to be fixated on." Blake laughed, but it was hollow, performative. "I'm just saying, man, there's no shame in it. Trophy husbands are a thing now. It's very modern, very progressive. The woman brings home the bacon, the man, I don't know, keeps the house clean, looks pretty, whatever it is you do while she's out here building empires." He gestured toward Tara, who I could see was now watching us fully, her face unreadable from this distance. "You know what I do," I said, setting my empty champagne glass down on a nearby table with more force than necessary. "I fix things that are broken, which means I'm looking at you right now and seeing a whole lot of job security. A few people actually, edit that, like we were in a high school cafeteria and someone had just launched a sick burn." Blake's smile finally cracked, replaced by something harder, something meaner. His eyes narrowed, and I watched him recalculate, watched him decide that the friendly ribbing portion of the evening was over and it was time to go for the throat. I should have walked away right then. Should have excused myself, found Tara, told her I wasn't feeling well and we needed to leave. Should have been the bigger man, turned the other cheek, chosen peace over pride. But I didn't. Because sometimes, when you spend your whole life being underestimated, being looked down on, being treated like you're less than because you work with your hands instead of sitting in an office, something inside you just snaps. And you decide that maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop being the guy who takes it and becomes the guy who does something about it. Blake must have seen something in my face, some shift in my expression, because his smile came back full force. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Hit a nerve." "Not yet," I said, "but give it a minute." Blake took a long, deliberate sip of his champagne, the kind of sip that said he was savoring the moment, basking in whatever weird power trip he thought he was on. The crowd around us had multiplied like rabbits, and I realized with a sinking feeling that we'd become the main event of the evening. Forget the fancy appetizers and the open bar. This was what people would remember. This was the story they'd tell their spouses when they got home, probably with embellishments about how they totally saw it coming. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, that particular combination of adrenaline and anger that makes your vision sharpen and your hearing go slightly hollow. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to just leave, to walk away, to be the mature adult my mother always hoped I'd become. But there was another voice, quieter but more insistent, that said if I walked away now, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. I'd lie awake at 3 in the morning replaying this moment, thinking of all the things I should have said, all the ways I could have stood up for myself. Blake set his glass down on the railing and turned to face me fully, squaring his shoulders in a way that reminded me of a rooster puffing up before a fight. The comparison would have been funny if I wasn't currently the other rooster in this scenario. "You know what I think?" he said, and I didn't respond because clearly he was going to tell me whether I wanted to hear it or not. "I think you're insecure. I think you know you're punching above your weight with Tara, and it kills you that she has to introduce you as her husband instead of showing you off as some kind of success story." A woman in a black dress. I think her name was Jennifer or Jessica or some other J name that screamed, peaked in sorority. Put her hand over her mouth in mock shock, but her eyes were gleaming with the kind of excitement people get when they know they're witnessing something they shouldn't. "Blake, oh my God," she stage whispered, which meant she said it at exactly the volume required for everyone to hear. "Am I wrong?" Blake asked, addressing the crowd now like he was a lawyer making his closing argument to a jury of champagne-drunk marketing executives. "Look at him. Look at that suit. I'm pretty sure I saw it on a mannequin at Men's Warehouse in 2019. Those shoes have seen better days, probably better years. And that tie?" He pointed at my geometric nightmare of a tie like it had personally offended him. "That tie is a cry for help." People laughed. Actually laughed. Not uncomfortable chuckles or nervous titters, but real, genuine laughter, the kind that comes from the belly and makes people double over slightly. I stood there, my hands clenched at my sides, feeling like I was back in middle school getting roasted by the popular kids while everyone else watched and did nothing. I scanned the crowd for Tara, found her standing about 15 feet away with a group of her coworkers. Our eyes met, and for a second, just 1 second, I thought she might say something, might step in and shut this down, might defend her husband against this walking cologne advertisement who apparently had nothing better to do than tear apart a guy he'd met 5 minutes ago. But she didn't. She just stood there, her expression somewhere between uncomfortable and entertained, like she was watching a reality TV show she knew she shouldn't enjoy but couldn't quite turn off. Blake was on a roll now, feeding off the crowd's energy like some kind of corporate vampire. "Here's what I don't get," he continued, moving closer to me, close enough that I could count the pores on his aggressively exfoliated face. "What does a woman like Tara, smart, successful, gorgeous, what does she see in a guy whose biggest accomplishment is probably getting an oil change done in under an hour?" More laughter. Someone actually clapped, which seemed excessive. "Maybe he's got other qualities," a guy in a purple shirt offered, trying to be diplomatic, which I appreciated even though it was too little too late. "Oh, I'm sure he does," Blake said with a knowing smirk. "But let's be honest about what this is. Tara's the breadwinner, the powerhouse, the one with the career trajectory that actually goes up instead of just side to side. And him?" He gestured at me with his champagne glass, sloshing a little of the liquid onto the pristine rooftop floor. "He's arm candy. Decoration. The trophy husband you wheel out for company events so people don't think you're married to your job." My jaw was so tight I thought my teeth might crack. My fingernails were digging into my palms hard enough that I'd probably have little half-moon marks there tomorrow. But I kept my mouth shut because I knew that if I opened it, something would come out that couldn't be taken back. Blake leaned in closer, and his breath hit my face in a wave of champagne and smug satisfaction. This was it, I realized. This was the moment he'd been building toward, the punchline he'd been setting up since he walked over. I could see it in his eyes, that gleeful, malicious spark that said he was about to drop a bomb just to watch me react. "Let's call it what it is," he said, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that somehow carried to every corner of our little crowd. "You're nothing but a trophy husband. Impotent and broke." The word hit me like a physical blow. Impotent. He'd actually said it, out loud, in front of my wife's coworkers, in front of strangers, in front of Tara herself. The crowd exploded, not with laughter exactly, but with that sharp collective intake of breath that said he'd crossed a line, but they were definitely here for it. And then they did laugh. Someone snorted, an actual snort like a pig, and suddenly everyone was losing it. People were wiping tears from their eyes, holding their stomachs, turning to their neighbors to repeat what Blake had said in case they'd somehow missed it. I felt my ears burning, felt heat creeping up my neck and into my face. My vision tunneled slightly, everything around Blake going fuzzy at the edges. My brain was screaming 1,000 different things at once. Walk away, say something clever, defend yourself, punch him, don't punch him, definitely punch him, absolutely do not punch him under any circumstances. That's when Kelly chimed in. Kelly from whatever department Kelly was from, a woman with bottle blonde hair and a laugh like a car alarm. She was standing just behind Blake, holding a martini glass with 3 olives in it, and she was grinning like Christmas had come early. "Oh, be nice, Blake," she said with absolutely zero sincerity. "We all know Tara loves his bed." The rooftop exploded. I'm talking full-on eruption of laughter, the kind that echoes off buildings and probably violates noise ordinances. People were practically crying, clutching each other for support, doubling over. Someone's phone camera flash went off, capturing the moment for posterity and probably Instagram. I looked at Tara again, desperate for some kind of support, some indication that this wasn't okay, that she was as horrified by this as I was. And for a fraction of a second, I saw something in her face, maybe embarrassment, maybe sympathy, maybe recognition that this had gone too far. And then she smiled. Not a big smile, not a laugh, just this little upturn of her lips like she found the whole thing kind of amusing. Like her coworkers publicly questioning my manhood and making jokes about our sex life was just harmless fun, just office banter, just the price of admission to her world. And then she looked away. That was it. That was the moment something inside me broke, snapped clean in half like a dried twig. Not just my pride or my ego, but something deeper, something fundamental about what I thought my marriage was, what I thought we were to each other. I'd spent 3 years being understanding about her career, about the long hours and the work trips and the company events that I wasn't invited to. I'd smiled through the jokes about being a grease monkey and the assumptions that I was somehow less than because I worked with my hands. I'd shrunk myself down to fit into her world, made myself smaller so she could shine brighter. And she just smiled while her coworkers tore me apart for entertainment. My hand moved before my brain could stop it, setting my champagne glass down on the nearest surface with a sharp click. The laughter was still going, people still riding the high of Blake's zingers, still thinking this was all in good fun. Blake himself was basking in it, his arms spread wide like a conductor acknowledging his orchestra, his face flushed with triumph and expensive alcohol. I straightened my tie. That stupid geometric tie that Tara had bought me, that I'd worn because I thought it would make her happy. I rolled my shoulders back, cracked my neck once to the left, once to the right. My hands were steady, I noticed. Completely steady, despite the fact that my heart was trying to jackhammer its way out of my chest. "You know," I said quietly, so quietly that people had to stop laughing to hear me, and the silence spread outward like ripples on a pond. "People like you are why HR departments exist." Blake's smile widened. He thought I was retreating, I realized. He thought that was my white flag, my admission of defeat. "Oh yeah," he said, playing to the crowd. "What are you going to do about it? Write a Yelp review? Give me a 1-star rating? Leave an angry comment on LinkedIn?" The crowd tittered, waiting for my response, expecting me to either slink away in defeat or fire back with some weak comeback that Blake would demolish with another perfectly crafted insult. I took one step forward, closing the distance between us. "Not exactly," I said, and that's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was about to do something spectacularly stupid. Here's the thing about making monumentally bad decisions. There's usually a split second right before you commit where your brain tries to save you from yourself. It's like a last-ditch emergency broadcast system, flashing red lights and sirens, screaming, "Abort mission." I repeat, abort mission. In that fraction of a moment, you have a choice. You can listen to the rational part of your brain that's begging you to walk away, to be the bigger person, to remember that assault charges are expensive and inconvenient. Or you can tell that rational part to take a hike and let the lizard brain take the wheel. Guess which option I chose? I want to be clear about something. I'm not a violent guy. I don't get into bar fights or road rage incidents. I don't solve problems with my fists like some kind of off-brand action hero. The last time I'd punched someone was in high school, and that was because Derek Henderson had stolen my lunch money 3 days in a row, and I'd finally had enough. I got suspended for a week, my mom cried, and I learned a valuable lesson about conflict resolution that apparently didn't stick because here I was, 20 years later, about to throw all that personal growth directly into the garbage. But standing there on that rooftop, looking at Blake's smug face, hearing the echoes of laughter still bouncing around in my skull, thinking about the way Tara had actually smiled. While these people humiliated me, something primal took over. Some ancient part of my brain that remembered when disputes were settled with clubs and rocks instead of strongly worded emails said, "You know what? Enough is enough." I pulled my right hand back. Not too far, not like some telegraphed haymaker you'd see in a movie, just a quick, efficient motion that came from years of working under cars and developing what my high school gym teacher used to call functional strength. Blake was still grinning at me, still waiting for whatever pathetic response he thought I was going to give, still riding high on his little performance. He didn't even see it coming. My fist connected with his jaw with a sound that was somehow both satisfying and horrifying, a solid thwack that echoed across the rooftop like someone had dropped a phone book on a table. It wasn't a perfect punch. My form was probably terrible, and I definitely didn't follow through the way you're supposed to. But it didn't matter because the important thing was that it landed, and it landed hard. Time did that weird thing where it simultaneously speeds up and slows down. I watched Blake's head snap to the side, his perfectly styled hair finally getting messed up, his expression shifting from smug superiority to shocked confusion in the space of a heartbeat. His champagne glass, that expensive crystal thing he'd been clutching like a security blanket, flew out of his hand in a perfect arc, spinning end over end through the air like some kind of tragic Olympic event. Champagne sprayed everywhere, catching the light from the chandeliers and creating this momentary rainbow effect that would have been beautiful if it wasn't accompanied by the sound of Blake's designer shoes losing traction on the rooftop floor. He stumbled backward, arms windmilling like he was trying to fly or maybe conduct an invisible orchestra, and crashed directly into one of those high-top cocktail tables that rich people love to stand around at parties because apparently sitting is too pedestrian. The table didn't stand a chance. It went over with a crash that somehow sounded expensive, and Blake went down with it, taking the entire shrimp cocktail tower with him in what can only be described as the most dramatic exit I've ever witnessed outside of a soap opera. Shrimp flew everywhere. Ice scattered across the rooftop like the world's worst confetti. Cocktail sauce splattered on someone's white dress, and I heard a woman shriek like she'd just witnessed a murder instead of a well-deserved punch to the face of a guy who absolutely had it coming. For exactly 3 seconds, nobody moved. The entire rooftop was frozen in this perfect tableau of shock and disbelief, like someone had hit pause on the universe. People stood with their drinks halfway to their mouths, their eyes wide, their brains clearly trying to process what they'd just seen. Even the bartender stopped mid-pour, whiskey dribbling unnoticed onto the counter. Blake lay sprawled on the ground like a Ken doll someone had thrown in a fit of rage, one leg bent at an awkward angle, his suit jacket riding up to expose his monogrammed belt buckle, because of course he had a monogrammed belt buckle. His hand was pressed to his jaw, his eyes watering, and his mouth was opening and closing like a fish that had just realized it was out of water and things were not going to end well. Then the silence shattered. "Oh my God!" someone screamed, and suddenly everyone was moving at once, rushing forward or stumbling backward or just standing there filming on their phones because apparently nobody's first instinct anymore is to actually help. It's to capture content for social media. I could see at least 7 phones pointed in my direction, could imagine the headlines already. Mechanic loses it at marketing party, or trophy husband fights back, or whatever clickbait garbage would inevitably end up trending on Twitter. Tara appeared in my peripheral vision, her gold dress catching the light as she pushed through the crowd, and the look on her face was something I'd never seen before, a mixture of horror, disbelief, and maybe, just maybe, a tiny bit of excitement, like some part of her had always wondered what would happen if her two worlds collided, and now she had her answer. "Mason," she shrieked, and her voice had gone up about 3 octaves into a register I didn't know she could hit. "Mason, what the hell is wrong with you?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and something about the question struck me as fundamentally hilarious. What was wrong with me? What was wrong with me? I'd just spent the last hour being insulted, belittled, and publicly humiliated while she stood by and did nothing, and she wanted to know what was wrong with me. I fixed something broken, I said calmly, flexing my hand, because holy hell, punching someone hurts a lot more than the movies make it seem, and I was pretty sure I'd jammed at least 2 knuckles. Isn't that what I do for a living? Blake groaned from his position on the floor, trying to sit up and failing because he was covered in shrimp and ice, and what I'm pretty sure was someone's spilled Cosmopolitan. He assaulted me, he managed to say, his voice coming out weird and slurred because I'm pretty sure I'd knocked something loose in his jaw. Did you see that? Everyone saw that. He assaulted me. Nah, I said, shaking my head. I didn't assault you. I adjusted your attitude. Big difference. One's a crime, the other's a public service. A guy in the crowd, I think his name was Marcus, he looked like a Marcus, actually laughed at that before catching himself and turning it into a cough. A few other people were smirking too, trying to hide it behind their hands or their drinks, because apparently some part of them recognized that Blake had absolutely deserved what he got, even if they'd never admit it out loud. Security arrived then, because of course there was security at this ridiculous party. 2 guys in black polo shirts with earpieces who looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. They pushed through the crowd with the kind of urgency that suggested someone had told them there was a situation, which I guess there was, considering I was standing over their co-worker's body like some kind of blue-collar vigilante. Sir, the bigger one said, putting a hand on my shoulder that I immediately shrugged off. You need to come with us. I'm aware, I said, because I'm not an idiot and I knew exactly how this was going to play out. I was going to be escorted out, probably banned from the building, and depending on how vindictive Blake felt, possibly dealing with police later. But you know what? In that moment, looking at Blake sprawled on the ground covered in seafood, watching Tara's horrified expression, seeing the mixture of shock and barely suppressed amusement on everyone else's faces, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Satisfied. Cynthia appeared then, the HR manager, a woman who looked like she ate conflict for breakfast and washed it down with the tears of employees who'd violated the handbook. She was clutching a tablet to her chest like a shield, her sensible heels clicking on the rooftop floor, and her expression was the kind of disappointed that suggested she'd seen some things in her career, but this was definitely making the top 10. Sir, she said, her voice dripping with barely controlled fury wrapped in corporate politeness. You cannot just assault people at company events. I raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, I didn't assault him. I adjusted his attitude. There's a difference. One requires a police report, the other just requires an ice pack and some humble pie. Her lips pressed into a thin line that could have cut glass. You need to leave. Immediately. Gladly. I said, straightening my jacket and trying to look dignified despite the fact that my hand was throbbing and I was pretty sure I had cocktail sauce on my shoe. I charged by the hour anyway, and this party stopped being worth my time about 45 minutes ago. I turned to leave, and the crowd parted for me like I was Moses and they were the Red Sea, except instead of Israelites, it was a bunch of marketing executives in expensive clothes trying not to make eye contact. Some looked horrified. Some looked impressed. One guy actually gave me a subtle nod that said, respect, which I appreciated even though it didn't change the fact that I'd just committed assault at my wife's company party. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Blake whimpering behind me, heard Tara saying something I couldn't quite make out, heard the general murmur of 50 people all trying to process what they'd just witnessed. And you know what? I didn't look back. The 2 security guards flanked me like I was some kind of international criminal instead of a guy who'd punched one douchebag at a corporate party, which honestly felt like overkill, but I wasn't about to argue with guys who probably had tasers and a deep-seated resentment for their jobs. The bigger one, his name tag said Marcus, which meant I'd been right earlier. I do know a Marcus when I see one. Kept his hand hovering near my elbow like he was ready to grab me if I made any sudden movements toward the shrimp tower or whatever was left of it. This way, sir, Marcus said, his voice professionally neutral in that way that security guards and flight attendants master, where they could be escorting you to a complimentary upgrade or a holding cell, and you wouldn't know which until you got there. I know where the exit is, I said, but I followed anyway because I'm not completely stupid, just stupid enough to punch someone at my wife's work party, which is a very specific level of stupid that I was still processing. Behind me, I could hear the crowd starting to buzz again, that low hum of 50 conversations all starting at once. Everyone immediately pulling out their phones to text their friends or post about what they'd just witnessed or whatever it is people do when they see something they'll be talking about for the next 6 months. Blake was being helped to his feet by 3 people who all looked deeply uncomfortable with the task, like they were worried he might be contagious or sue them for workers' comp if they pulled him up wrong. He was holding his jaw with one hand and pointing at me with the other, his face red and his eyes watering, and I'm not gonna lie, seeing him look that pathetic after spending the last 30 minutes acting like God's gift to the marketing world gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling that was probably unhealthy, but I was going to enjoy it anyway. "I'm pressing charges," he shouted, his voice coming out garbled because his jaw was already swelling. "That's assault. Battery. I'll sue you for everything you have." I stopped walking, which made Marcus tense up beside me, but I just turned back and called over my shoulder, "Good luck with that, buddy. I own a garage and a 10-year-old truck. You can have half of both if you really want him." Someone in the crowd snorted, and tried to cover it with a cough, but I heard it, and it made me smile. Small victories. We made it to the elevator, which required a key card that Marcus had to swipe because apparently you needed security clearance to leave this place, which seemed counterintuitive, but what did I know about corporate buildings? The doors opened with a polite ding that felt wildly out of place considering I was being escorted out like a drunk college kid at a casino, and we all piled in. Me, Marcus, and the other security guard whose name tag said Dimitri, and who hadn't said a single word the entire time. The elevator doors closed, sealing us in with the kind of awkward silence that makes you want to crawl out of your own skin. Soft jazz played from the speakers overhead, some instrumental version of a song I vaguely recognized from a commercial about retirement planning, or maybe constipation medication, and I watched the floor numbers tick down with the kind of intense focus that suggested I was very interested in how elevators worked and definitely not thinking about the fact that I just torpedoed my wife's reputation at her job. "For what it's worth," Marcus said after we'd passed the 12th floor, "that guy's a dick." I looked at him, surprised. Dimitri made a noise that might have been agreement or might have been a sneeze. It was hard to tell. "Been working security here for 3 years," Marcus continued, his eyes still fixed on the elevator doors like he was watching a particularly riveting movie. "Blake Crawford's on the list." "The list?" I asked. "The list of people who, if something happened to them, we wouldn't be that upset about it." He glanced at me. "You're probably getting banned from the building, maybe arrested depending on whether he follows through with pressing charges. But between you and me, worth it." That jaw shot was clean. "Thanks," I said, because what else do you say when security compliments your assault technique? "I work with my hands." "Yeah, I could tell." He rubbed his own jaw sympathetically. "Gonna feel that tomorrow, though. Punching someone hurts like hell if you're not used to it." He wasn't wrong. My hand was already throbbing, a deep ache settling into my knuckles that promised I'd be icing it later and probably having trouble gripping a wrench for the next few days. I flexed my fingers experimentally and winced. Definitely jammed something. Maybe broke something. I'd know for sure once the adrenaline wore off and the real pain kicked in. The elevator reached the lobby, and the doors opened to reveal Cynthia standing there with her arms crossed and her tablet clutched against her chest like armor. She looked like she'd run down 15 flights of stairs, which maybe she had. Or maybe she'd just taken a different elevator and beaten us down through sheer force of HR determination. Her sensible heels had left little scuff marks on the marble floor behind her, and her hair, which had been in a perfect bun earlier, had a few strands escaping around her face, giving her a slightly unhinged look that made me instinctively take a step back. "Mr. Ridgway," she said, and the way she said my name made it sound like a curse word. "I need you to understand the severity of what just occurred. I punched a guy who insulted me," I said. "I understand that's bad. I'm leaving. We're all on the same page here." Her eye twitched. Actually twitched, like a character in a cartoon who's about to lose it. "You assaulted an employee at a company function. There will be consequences. Legal consequences. Professional consequences for your wife." That last part hit different. Professional consequences for Tara. I hadn't thought about that. Not really. Not in the heat of the moment when my fist was connecting with Blake's face. I'd been so focused on my own humiliation, my own anger, that I hadn't considered what this would mean for her career, her relationships with her coworkers, her standing at a company where image and networking were apparently more important than basic human decency. "Look," I said, and I tried to make my voice reasonable even though reasonable had left the building about 20 minutes ago. "Your employee spent the better part of half an hour publicly humiliating me. He questioned my manhood, my financial situation, and made jokes about my sex life in front of 50 people while everyone laughed. I'm not saying what I did was right, but I am saying he earned it." Cynthia's expression didn't change. "That doesn't give you the right to commit violence." "You're right," I admitted, because she was, technically, legally right even if she was morally in a gray area. But it felt really good, and I'd probably do it again given the same circumstances. "So maybe just ban me from the building, and we can all move on with our lives." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her brain working through whatever HR protocol handbook was stored in her head, trying to figure out how to handle a situation that probably didn't come up in the training videos. Finally, she uncrossed her arms and tapped something on her tablet with more force than necessary. "You're banned from all Bright Lane marketing properties indefinitely," she said. "If you attempt to enter any of our buildings, you'll be arrested for trespassing. If Blake Crawford decides to press charges, you'll be hearing from the police. And your wife will be required to attend a meeting on Monday morning to discuss her employment status." My stomach dropped at that last part. Her employment status? She didn't do anything. "She brought you to a company event where you assaulted a colleague," Cynthia said coldly. "That reflects poorly on her judgment and creates a liability for the company." "That's bullshit," I said, my voice getting louder despite Marcus's warning hand on my shoulder. "You're going to punish her because her husband defended himself against workplace harassment? That's what Blake was doing, by the way. Harassing me. Where's his HR meeting?" "Mr. Crawford will also be spoken to about his behavior," Cynthia said. But her tone suggested that conversation would be a gentle reminder about professionalism, while Tara's would be more along the lines of "clean out your desk." "Unbelievable," I muttered. "Absolutely unbelievable. You people sit around all day talking about toxic workplace culture and respect and inclusivity, and then when someone actually stands up to a bully, they're the problem." "You punched someone," Cynthia repeated, like I might have forgotten in the last 30 seconds. "And I'd do it again," I said. "In fact, I'm starting to think maybe I didn't hit him hard enough, because clearly the message didn't land." Marcus coughed into his fist, and it sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Dimitri's shoulders were shaking slightly, his face carefully neutral. Cynthia's lips pressed together so tightly they almost disappeared. "Please escort Mr. Ridgway from the building," she said to the security guards, then turned on her heel and walked away, her shoes clicking on the marble with the rhythm of someone who was deeply, profoundly done with this conversation and possibly reconsidering her career choices. Marcus and Dimitri walked me the rest of the way to the front doors, which were all glass and chrome and reflected my image back at me in unflattering detail. I looked rumpled, my tie crooked, my hair messed up from running my hands through it, my suit jacket wrinkled. I looked like exactly what I was. A guy who didn't belong in this world and had just proven it in the most spectacular way possible. "Take care of that hand," Marcus said as he pushed open the door. "Take care of yourselves," I replied. And then I was outside, standing on the sidewalk in downtown at 9:30 on a Saturday night, banned from my wife's workplace, possibly facing assault charges, and absolutely certain that I'd just made the biggest mistake of my married life. The cool night air hit my face, and I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs and clear my head slightly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably Tara, probably furious, probably ready to tell me exactly how badly I'd screwed up. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, and a notification that I'd been tagged in a video on social media. Well, shit. I stood on that sidewalk for a solid 5 minutes, staring at my phone like it was a bomb that hadn't decided whether to explode yet, watching the notification count climb in real time. 23 texts became 31. 17 missed calls became 22. The video I'd been tagged in had 47 views when I first looked, and by the time I worked up the courage to actually click on it, that number had jumped to 216. The video started shaky. Whoever filmed it had clearly been startled by the actual punch. But it stabilized quickly enough to capture the full glory of Blake Crawford getting introduced to my fist in high definition. Someone had already added a caption. Mechanic destroys sleazy coworker at rooftop party skull skull skull, with about 15 hashtags that included gems like hashtag instant karma, hashtag trophy husband fights back, and inexplicably, hashtag shrimps forever, which I'm guessing was a reference to the cocktail tower Blake had taken down with him. The sound quality was surprisingly good. You could hear everything. Blake's smug voice saying impotent and broke, Kelly's shrieking laughter and her comment about Tara's bed, the collective gasp when my fist connected, and my personal favorite, my completely deadpan delivery of, I fix things that are broken. Isn't that what I do for a living? Followed by Blake's pathetic groaning from somewhere off camera. The comments section was already a war zone. Half the people were calling me a hero, saying things like, finally someone shut that guy up, and my man said enough, with crying laughing emojis. The other half were pearl-clutching about violence and assault and how I should be arrested, which, fair enough, they had a point even if I didn't want to hear it. But the ratio was definitely in my favor, which felt weird to say about a video of me committing a crime. Someone had screen recorded it and posted it to 3 other platforms. Someone else had made it into a GIF. A third person, and I don't know how they worked this fast, had already created a remix with sound effects, adding a cartoon bonk when my fist connected and the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme when Blake fell into the shrimp tower. My phone rang again, and this time it was Tara, so I figured I couldn't avoid it forever even though every instinct I had was screaming to let it go to voicemail and deal with this tomorrow when I'd had time to come up with literally any explanation that didn't make me sound like a caveman who solved problems with his knuckles. I answered, "Hey. Hey." Her voice came through the speaker so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Hey, that's all you have to say? Mason, what the actual hell were you thinking?" "I wasn't," I admitted, because there was no point lying about it. "I wasn't thinking. I was reacting. There's a difference." "Oh, there's a difference," she said, and I could hear the sound of a door closing, probably her finding somewhere private to yell at me without an audience. One makes you look stupid, the other makes you look psychotic. Congratulations, you managed both. I leaned against the building, my non-punching hand rubbing my face. My knuckles were really starting to hurt now, a deep throbbing ache that suggested I'd definitely done some damage. "Tara, your coworker spent 30 minutes insulting me to my face while everyone laughed. He called me impotent. In front of 50 people. In front of you. So you punched him," she said flatly. "That was your solution. Violence. What was I supposed to do?" I asked, and I heard my voice getting louder, anger bubbling back up even though I was trying to stay calm. "Stand there and take it? Laugh along with everyone else. Smile while your office peacock buddy tore me apart for entertainment. You were supposed to be an adult," she snapped. "You were supposed to walk away, or tell him off with words like a normal person, or literally anything except assault him at my company party." I did use words, I pointed out. Several words. And then when words didn't work, I escalated to fists. It's called a proportional response. It's called assault and battery. Mason. That's what it's called. That's what the police are going to call it when Blake presses charges, which he absolutely is going to do because you broke his jaw. I stood up straighter. I broke his jaw. Maybe. Probably. I don't know. He won't stop moaning long enough for anyone to get a good look at it. But there's definitely damage. Congratulations, you might have caused permanent injury to my coworker. Part of me, a small, petty part that I'm not proud of, felt a surge of satisfaction at that. Blake's perfect face wouldn't be so perfect anymore. His jaw would click when he talked, or maybe he'd need surgery, or maybe every time he looked in the mirror, he'd remember the night a mechanic in a cheap suit taught him that words have consequences. But the larger part of me, the part that was married and 38 years old and supposedly mature, felt sick. I'd actually hurt someone. Not just embarrassed them or knocked them down, but potentially caused real, lasting damage. That wasn't who I was. That wasn't who I wanted to be. "Tara," I said quietly, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I embarrassed you. I'm sorry I made a scene. I'm sorry I put your job at risk. But I'm not sorry I stood up for myself. I'm not sorry I finally said enough is enough." Silence on the other end. I could hear voices in the background, people talking, someone laughing, the party continuing without us because the show must go on even when the entertainment punches someone. "They're talking about firing me," she said finally, her voice smaller now, scared in a way I'd rarely heard. "Cynthia pulled me aside and said I showed poor judgment bringing you. That I'm responsible for your actions. that this reflects on my ability to represent the company. My stomach dropped. They can't fire you for something I did. They can do whatever they want, Mason. It's an at-will employment state. They can fire me because they don't like my shoes if they frame it right. She took a shaky breath, and I realized she was crying. I've worked so hard to get where I am. 3 years of 80-hour weeks, of sucking up to clients I can't stand, of pretending to laugh at Blake's stupid jokes, and playing the game and doing everything right. And you destroyed it in 5 seconds. That hit harder than it should have. Because she was right. I had destroyed it. Maybe Blake deserved that punch. Maybe he'd been asking for it. Maybe every single person at that party had secretly wanted to do what I did. But consequences didn't care about maybe. Consequences only cared about what actually happened. And what actually happened was that I'd committed assault at a company function, and now my wife might lose her job. I'll fix it, I said, even though I had no idea how. I'll talk to Cynthia. I'll apologize to Blake. I'll do whatever it takes. You're banned from the building, Tara said. And Blake isn't answering his phone, probably because his jaw is wired shut or he's already talking to a lawyer. There's nothing you can fix here, Mason. You broke it too badly. We sat in silence for a moment, or she sat wherever she was, and I stood on the sidewalk watching strangers walk by, living their normal Saturday nights that didn't involve viral videos or potential assault charges. I should get back to the party, she said finally. I need to do damage control, try to smooth things over with people who actually matter to my career. When are you coming home? I asked. Another pause. I don't know. Late. Maybe I'll stay at Sarah's tonight. I need some space to think. And then she hung up, leaving me standing there with a throbbing hand and a sinking feeling that I'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Yo, is this the guy from the video? That was legendary bro Blake. Crawford's been asking for that for years. You're a hero. Another text, different number. I run a podcast about workplace conflicts. Would you be interested in being interviewed about your experience? A third. Local news here. We'd love to get your side of the story. I scrolled through them, watching the messages pile up from strangers, from old high school friends I hadn't talked to in 15 years, from customers whose cars I'd fixed, from Tara's cousin, who I'd met exactly once at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had something to say. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. The video was at 15,000 views now. Someone had made a TikTok about it with a dramatic voiceover. Someone else had turned it into a meme format, replacing Blake's insult with various other provocations and my punch with, and I took that personally. I was viral. I was trending locally. I was the mechanic who'd snapped at a corporate party, and apparently, that resonated with people in a way I hadn't expected. The comments were full of stories about their own Blake Crawfords, their own moments of being talked down to by people in fancy suits who thought blue-collar work was beneath them. I'd become some kind of accidental working-class hero, which would have been flattering if it didn't come with the strong possibility of criminal charges and a destroyed marriage. I finally pushed off the building and started walking toward where I'd parked my truck, 6 blocks away, because street parking in this neighborhood was apparently a blood sport. My hand hurt with every swing of my arm. My head hurt from thinking about the mess I'd created. My heart hurt from the conversation with Tara, from knowing I'd let her down in the most spectacular way possible. But somewhere underneath all that hurt, buried deep where I didn't want to acknowledge it, was a tiny spark of something else. Something that felt dangerously close to satisfaction. Because for the first time in 3 years of playing the supportive husband, of shrinking myself to fit into Tara's world, of taking jokes and insults with a smile, I'd finally stood up and said no. And yeah, maybe I'd said it with my fist instead of my words. Maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe I'd blown up my entire life for one moment of standing up for myself. But at least I'd stood up. I spent Sunday in my garage, which is where I go when I need to think or hide from my problems or both. There's something meditative about working on engines, about taking something broken and making it whole again, about problems that have actual solutions instead of just spiraling into more problems. Mrs. Henderson's Camry needed new brake pads, which was a straightforward job that required exactly zero emotional intelligence and didn't involve anyone questioning my manhood or my bank account. My phone kept buzzing on the workbench, texts, calls, social media notifications that I'd muted but couldn't quite bring myself to turn off completely. The video had hit 50,000 views overnight. Someone had made a Wikipedia page about me that listed my occupation as auto mechanic slash amateur boxer slash working class hero, which was both hilarious and deeply concerning. A local gym had offered me a free membership. 3 different lawyers had reached out offering to represent me if Blake pressed charges, 2 of them pro bono because apparently punching a smug corporate guy had made me some kind of folk hero. Tara hadn't come home. She'd texted around midnight to say she was staying at Sarah's and needed time to think, which I understood even though it felt like someone had hollowed out my chest with a rusty spoon. I'd slept alone in our bed, or more accurately, I'd laid awake in our bed staring at the ceiling and replaying the whole disaster in my head, trying to figure out the exact moment where I could have made a different choice and avoided this entire mess. Spoiler alert, there were about 17 different moments, and I'd ignored all of them. My hand was a mess, knuckles swollen and bruised, 2 fingers I definitely couldn't bend without wincing, a general ache that radiated up my forearm and reminded me with every movement that I was an idiot who'd chosen violence. I'd iced it, wrapped it, taken enough ibuprofen to worry my liver, but it still looked like I'd lost a fight with a meat tenderizer. Every time I gripped a wrench wrong, pain shot through my hand, and I thought about Blake's face, about the satisfying sound of impact, about whether that moment of vindication had been worth potentially destroying my marriage. The jury was still out on that one. Monday morning rolled around with all the enthusiasm of a root canal, and I was 3 knuckles deep in an oil change when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail. If you're calling about my car's extended warranty, I don't want to hear it, but something made me wipe my hands on my coveralls and answer. Ridge Auto Works, this is Mason. Mr. Ridgway. A male voice said, smooth and professional with just a hint of amusement. This is Robert Denham. I'm the VP of Operations at Bright Lane Marketing. I nearly dropped the phone. Tara's boss. The big boss. The guy who decided things like who got promoted and who got fired, and whether a mechanic who'd punched an employee at a company party should be forgiven or prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Mr. Denham. I managed, my brain scrambling to shift from covered in motor oil mode to talking to the man who controls my wife's career mode. Look, about Saturday night. I've seen the video, he interrupted, which didn't make me feel better. Several times, actually. It's made quite the rounds in the office. I believe it's been shared in at least 6 different Slack channels. My stomach sank. Sir, I want to apologize. My behavior was completely unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for. Mr. Ridgway, he said, and there was definitely amusement in his voice now, clear as day. I'm not calling to chastise you. Well, not entirely. I'm calling to inform you that we've launched an internal investigation into the incident. An investigation? My mouth went dry. This was it. This was where they told me they were pressing charges, that Tara was fired, that I'd single-handedly destroyed everything she'd worked for. Into Blake Crawford's behavior, Denham clarified. See, when a video of one of my employees publicly humiliating a guest at a company function goes viral, that tends to raise some red flags. We've been reviewing the footage, interviewing attendees, and it turns out this wasn't an isolated incident. Blake has a history of inappropriate comments, boundary violations, and what HR is diplomatically calling workplace culture issues. I blinked, trying to process what I was hearing. So, you're investigating him? Not me. Oh, you're still banned from company property, Denham said cheerfully. And we absolutely cannot condone violence under any circumstances. If I saw you in person, I'd have to give you a very stern talking to about conflict resolution and appropriate responses to workplace harassment. He paused. That being said, strictly off the record, and between you and me, that punch had excellent form. Clean follow-through, proper weight distribution, textbook execution. Did you box? I laughed despite myself, a sharp bark of surprise. No, sir. I just work with my hands. Guess it translates. Indeed. I could hear him smiling through the phone. Anyway, I wanted to let you know that as of this morning, Blake Crawford is no longer employed by Bright Lane Marketing. We're calling it a mutual separation, but between us, he was given the choice to resign or be terminated for creating a hostile environment. He chose resignation, probably because it looks better on LinkedIn. My brain stuttered. You fired Blake? We accepted his resignation, Denham corrected. There's a difference, legally speaking, though the end result is the same. He'll be escorted from the building this afternoon, and we'll be implementing additional harassment training for all employees, which I'm sure they'll love. His tone suggested he knew exactly how much they'd hate it and didn't particularly care. What about Tara? I asked, because that was the only thing that really mattered. Is her job safe? Your wife is an exceptional employee, Denham said, his voice shifting to something more serious. One of our top performers, actually. Her campaigns have brought in significant revenue, and losing her would be a blow to the department. That said, she's been advised to maintain better judgment regarding guests at company functions, and she'll be attending a workshop on professional boundaries. So basically a slap on the wrist. Basically, he sounded amused again. Though I suspect the real punishment will be dealing with HR's PowerPoint presentations for the next 3 hours. Cynthia is very thorough. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Tara still had her job. Blake was gone. The universe had somehow, against all odds, landed on something resembling justice instead of the disaster I'd been bracing for. Mr. Ridgway, Denham continued, I want to be clear about something. What you did was wrong. Legally, ethically, practically, wrong on every level. If Blake decides to press charges, which he may still do, you'll be dealing with legal consequences that I can't and won't interfere with. I understand, I said. However, and his voice dropped lower, more confidential. I've been in corporate leadership for 23 years. I've seen a lot of Blake Crawfords. Guys who think a fancy title and an expensive suit give them permission to treat people like garbage. They create toxic environments, drive away good employees, and generally make everyone's life miserable while hiding behind corporate speak and plausible deniability. Usually, they get away with it because nobody's willing to push back. He paused, and I waited. You pushed back, he said simply. Poorly, I might add. With your fist instead of the appropriate channels. But you pushed back, and sometimes that's what it takes to expose a problem that's been festering. So while I can't officially approve of your methods, I can appreciate the outcome. Thank you, I said, because what else do you say when your wife's boss basically admits you did the wrong thing for the right reasons? Take care of that hand, Denham said. And Mr. Ridgway? Perhaps consider anger management classes. Just a thought. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my garage holding a phone and trying to figure out if I'd just been complimented or threatened or both. The rest of the day passed in a blur of oil changes and tire rotations and customers who'd definitely seen the video, but were too polite to mention it directly, though I caught a few knowing looks and one guy actually fist-bumped me when he picked up his keys. Word travels fast in small communities, and apparently local mechanic Deck's corporate asshole was the kind of story people love to share. Tara called around 5, right as I was locking up the shop. I heard about Blake, she said without preamble. Yeah, I replied. Your boss called me. He what? I explained the conversation, including the part about the punch having good form, which made her laugh. An actual laugh, not the bitter, angry kind from yesterday. It was a small sound, barely there, but it felt like maybe, just maybe, we'd survive this. He also said you're keeping your job, I added. I know. I had a very long conversation with Cynthia this morning about professional judgment and appropriate guest behavior and 17 other things that could have been an email. She sighed. Mason, I'm still mad at you. I know. What you did was stupid and reckless and potentially illegal. I know. But, she trailed off, and I heard her take a breath. But Blake was out of line. Way out of line. And I should have said something. I should have defended you instead of standing there like a coward while everyone laughed. My throat tightened. You're not a coward. I let them treat you like garbage because I was worried about fitting in, about maintaining my image, about not making waves. That's pretty cowardly if you ask me. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry, Mason. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to do it yourself. I still shouldn't have punched him, I said. No, she agreed. You absolutely shouldn't have. But I'm glad Blake's gone. And I'm glad everyone knows you're not just some trophy husband who'll take whatever they dish out. I smiled despite myself. So I'm not sleeping on the couch forever? Just tonight, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I'm still processing. But come home, okay? We'll figure this out. Okay, I said. I'll pick up Chinese food. Extra egg rolls. Obviously, the thing about punching someone at your wife's work party is that it gives you a lot of time to think. Not just about the punch itself. Though trust me, I replayed that moment about 6,000 times, analyzing it like I was some kind of combat sports commentator, but about everything that led up to it. All the little compromises, the small humiliations, the moments where I'd swallowed my pride and told myself it didn't matter because keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity. I came home with Chinese food, extra egg rolls as promised, and found Tara sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine that was definitely not her first based on the bottle sitting next to her that was 2/3 empty. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from spending 8 hours doing damage control and pretending everything's fine when it's definitely not fine. "Hey," I said, setting the food down. "Hey," she replied, not looking at me. We ate in silence for a while, the only sound the scrape of chopsticks against containers and the occasional car passing outside. It was the kind of uncomfortable quiet that settles over couples who know they need to have a serious conversation, but neither wants to be the one to start it. I made it through half my lo mein before I couldn't take it anymore. "I've been thinking," I said, setting down my chopsticks, "about why I did what I did. And I don't think it was really about Blake." Tara looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and tired. "What do you mean?" "I mean, yeah, Blake's an asshole and he deserved to get checked. But the reason I snapped wasn't just about that one night. It was about 3 years of feeling like I had to shrink myself to fit into your world." I ran my hand through my hair, trying to find the right words. "Every time you introduced me to your coworkers, and I could see them doing the math. Mechanic plus marketing executive equals what's she doing with him? Every company dinner where I had to smile while someone made a joke about blue-collar work. Every time you laughed at something that wasn't funny because the person saying it mattered to your career." "Mason, let me finish," I said, not unkindly. "I love you. I'm proud of what you've built, genuinely proud. But somewhere along the way, I became your accessory instead of your partner. The plus one who came with the appetizers. And I let it happen because I didn't want to make waves, didn't want to be the insecure husband who couldn't handle his wife's success." Tara's eyes filled with tears. "I never meant to make you feel that way. I know you didn't. That's not how these things work. It's not one big moment. It's 1,000 small ones that add up until you're standing on a rooftop getting called impotent in front of 50 people and your wife smiles because she's worried about what they'll think if she doesn't." I leaned forward, my elbows on the table. "That smile killed me, Tara. Not Blake's insults, not the laughter, your smile. Because in that moment, I realized you'd chosen them over me." She was fully crying now, tears streaming down her face, and part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, to fall back into the pattern of making everything better even when it wasn't. But I didn't, because this conversation had been 3 years overdue, and if we didn't have it now, we never would. "You're right," she said, her voice breaking. "You're completely right, and I hate that you're right. I got so caught up in climbing the ladder, in proving I belonged, that I forgot the person I was supposed to be building this life with. I let them treat you like you were less than because some sick part of me thought if I acknowledged it, they'd see me as less than too. So where does that leave us?" I asked quietly. Tara wiped her eyes, smudging her mascara in a way that somehow made her look more real, more human than the polished version she presented to the world. "It leaves us here, having the conversation we should have had a long time ago. Me promising to do better, to actually defend you instead of worrying about my image. You promising to use your words before your fists." I laughed despite the heaviness of the moment. "Deal. Though for the record, my words didn't work." "Your words were pretty good," she admitted. "The participation medal thing was solid. Thanks." I workshopped it in my head for like 3 seconds. We sat there for a moment, the tension broken but not gone, just shifted into something we could maybe work with. Relationships aren't fixed in one conversation. I knew that from fixing cars, where sometimes you solve one problem only to discover 3 more underneath. But at least we were finally looking under the hood, instead of pretending the warning lights didn't mean anything. "I love you," Tara said. "Even when you're an idiot who punches people." "I love you too," I replied. "Even when you work for companies run by assholes." "Worked," she corrected with a small smile. Past tense. "I put in my 2 weeks notice today." I stared at her. "You what?" "We'll talk about it tomorrow," she said, standing up and taking my hand, the non-punching one. "Right now, I just want to go to bed with my husband and pretend the last 72 hours didn't happen." "I can do that," I said. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like maybe we were finally on the same team. 3 months later, life had settled back into something resembling normal, except better. Tara found a new job at a smaller firm where people actually treated each other like human beings instead of expendable resources. My hand healed, though it still ached when it rained. A permanent reminder that violence is rarely the answer, but sometimes it's incredibly satisfying. The video eventually stopped trending, replaced by some politician's scandal and a cat that could allegedly play piano. I was no longer a folk hero, just a mechanic who'd had one viral moment and was perfectly happy to return to obscurity. I was under a Honda Civic, wrestling with a stubborn exhaust system, when someone walked into the shop. I rolled out to find a guy in his 30s wearing khakis and a Bright Lane marketing lanyard, and my first instinct was to roll right back under the car and pretend I'd suddenly gone deaf. "You're Mason Ridgway," he said, grinning like he'd just met a celebrity. "Depends on who's asking," I replied cautiously. "Dude, you're a legend at Bright Lane. After you left, people started actually calling out the toxic bullshit. Blake's gone, 2 other guys got fired for harassment, and they completely overhauled the culture." He laughed. "They call you the torque wrench of justice." I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing so hard I nearly dropped my socket wrench. "The torque wrench of justice? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." "It's amazing," he insisted. "You're like a workplace vigilante, with grease stains." After he left, with his oil changed and a story to tell his coworkers, I stood in my garage, covered in motor oil and ridiculously happy. Tara texted, "Dinner at 7? I'm cooking." I smiled. Being a trophy husband wasn't so bad after all, as long as the trophy came with self-respect, a functioning marriage, and apparently, a superhero nickname. Sometimes the wrench fixes more than just engines.